So here we go. It's really lovely to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being with us. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's fantastic to have you with us today. So many of you on the line. What an amazing, amazing turnout. It was just obviously, I think the topic maybe that's something that people are struggling with, or the topic that people want to know more about. So it's really welcoming to you all, working with grumpy or difficult people and how difficult they really are, and what do we do with these people. And I don't know whether this is your situation, but there kind of seem to be more and more of them all over the place. So today I'm going to talk about these people and work out ways that we can actually try and deal with them in a much more productive and efficient way. And of course, the difficulty might be the fact that if the leader, the big leader, the boss is the difficult person or the bully, but we'll talk about those as we go through. So welcome. Just thought we'd go through the basics of really, do you want to work with people who are plain rude? Well, obviously the answer is no. But do you want to come into work dreading having to work with angry Annie or rude Ronnie or whoever they may be? Do you struggle with ongoing drama at work and a boss who's just plain difficult? Or it could be team members who are just plain difficult. And do you find there's ongoing office politics and an unreasonable, unsupportive boss in your working environment? The problem, ladies and gentlemen, with having an unreasonable and unsupportive boss is, as I talk to you as I go through the webinar today, what we know from research is that people, the greatest source of frustration or motivation or inspiration at work is actually our direct manager. And so when we have a direct manager who is either unreasonable or unsupportive or just plain rude, essentially it becomes very difficult for us at work or even to stay in that role or stay in the organization. And that's what we know from a lot of research, where people just leave in droves. So we'll talk about that as we go through the webinar. But I guess, would you like to go from working with difficult people in your team to having a polite, courteous group of people you work with? And some people might say, oh, well, that's a pretty much of a no-brainer, Karen. But actually it's not, because some people, what I find, they really enjoy working with difficult people. And sometimes I think people who enjoy working with drama queens or drama kings are drama queens or drama kings themselves, if you get what I mean. So then the drama just goes round and round. Do you go from the threat of leaving your job because of a grumpy colleague or boss to staying in your role and thriving? That's what you would like to do, to come to work and knowing, waking up in the morning, that I'm eager to get to work because I love what I do and because we all get on so well. In fact, so many people I work with in different organizations across the world say to me, I don't really like the boss or whatever the job is itself, but I really love the people with whom I work. But if you don't like the work and you don't like the people, well, you're not going to stay in the organization or be happy there. So would you like to have a highly supportive team that kicks goals time and time again? Of course we would. Absolutely we would. Would you like to have highly performing teams at all levels within your organization, driving your business forward with passion? Okay, so the cost of rude and grumpy people at work is significant. I mean, if you have a look at these statistics, I think this is pretty scary. $61.8 billion is the cost of work-related, issues around workplace grumpy people, bullying people to the Australian economy. And 480 million is the amount of workers' compensation paid each year due to related mental health issues. Now, the issue around, the reason why I'm saying this is that it's actually people who are grumpy and rude or difficult who create mental health issues in others. One might argue, well, actually, they've often got mental health issues themselves, and certainly they do have. But overall, this is a pretty frightening statistic if you think about how much it's costing not only the people themselves, but also the economy as a nation. It's pretty frightening. So some more sobering statistics: bosses comprise 61% of bullies. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But if you've got a boss who is a bully, it's a really difficult situation. More men, 70%, are bullies than women. And I think that women are the target 60% of bullies. So I think that comes to all the stuff that we've seen in the media. It means that, all the stuff that we see around gender inequality, pay inequality, all the stuff that you have in terms of gender inequality in the workplace, and by the way, in leadership roles. Female bullies most often target other women, 80%. This is a really interesting thing that I actually have run a webinar around. In fact, that, you know, when we talk about gender inequality at work, and it's an interesting phenomenon around, we often think, oh, well, men bully women, as it says, the first thing, more men are bullies. But actually for women, female bullies most often target other women than men do. And I think that's a really interesting trend for us as people to watch out for. Up to 81% of employees are perceived as doing nothing when targets of bullies obviously fill out a survey form to say that they have a problem. I think that's particularly concerning, where 80% of employees do nothing. And I think part of it is that they think or hope things will go away, or, you know, things will improve, and generally they don't. And there you go, 29%, 30% of employees who are targets of bullies say nothing. And then ultimately what happens is, if they say nothing, well, then it just continues. So rude, difficult, you know, people, the behaviors of these people just continues. And we know that 40% of people targeted by a bully experience stress and health problems. I don't have to give you these statistics. I think, ladies and gentlemen, you know exactly what they are. And I think, you know, dealing with rude and difficult people may mean a new perspective. So I often think to myself when I'm working in different organizations, okay, are there things we could be doing differently? Could recipients of bullying be doing things differently? Is there another way we can actually cope with these people who are rude, who are difficult? Is there a new way of looking at them? Is there a new way of thinking about how we can deal with them on a regular basis? A new way of working out what to say to them? Because one of the issues around bullies, we know from a lot of the research, or people who are difficult and just rude, is that very often, and I think this is psychology lesson 101, if you just leave them and do nothing about that, essentially it almost condones the behavior. So part of it really is that you need to be able to confront these people and say, you know, when you behave in this way, it affects me in this way, or it impacts the team, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But a fresh attitude to thinking about what needs to be done and how. Because when you're considering that all these percentages and all this money and billions of dollars that it's costing the economy, it means to me, working in so many organizations, that we're not doing enough about this issue of dealing with rude and difficult people. So maybe it's looking through fresh eyes. So we're often asked, or I'm often asked, would I come into organizations and help with this sort of thing? And obviously I'm happy to do that. But before I do that, I'm really happy to give you the opportunity of a one-on-one strategic review. But I think it's only if you're ready to action, you know, to do something about really learning about this issue, and to take this issue serious, and to be serious about this. Because, you know, for some of you on the line, I know some of you, I don't know all of you, but for those of you who know me, I work across 3 different continents and a range of different industries, so government, education, corporate, community, NGOs, and I see this particular issue of rude and difficult people in any industry on any continent. And I think it's about, so if we do have this as a human phenomenon, what are we going to do about this? You know, it just goes on and on and on. So I guess the question is, well, should you be listening to me? You know, who am I to be standing up telling you these things? You might ask yourself. Well, just a bit of background to me. I'm a psych. I work on 3 continents. I run a company called Pure Magic International Business Solutions. We like to believe that we're magic. Some of the references we have tell us we are. We hope we are. I've been working with organizations, companies, and people for over 25 years with a firm focus really on developing CEOs and senior leaders and teams. And why my focus largely is on top leaders is because I have no doubt in my mind, from working with so many companies, that the issues, ladies and gentlemen, generally start at the top of the organization, whichever way I look at it. And often then these things sort of run down the line, and I'll get organizational CEOs who'll phone me and say, Karen, we've got an issue down in a team at the coalface, let's say, you know, in customer service. And I'm thinking about somebody who rang me in Fiji and said, could you come to Fiji and help us with this problem? And I said, well, where's the problem? Oh, it's one of our people who are actually in hospitality serving customers. And I say, well, how long has the problem been there? Well, they've been rude and difficult for a long time. How long is long? Oh, probably now about 2 years. The issue, ladies and gentlemen, is not the people down the line. The issue is the people at the top of the line. So obviously these people are people who are perpetuating behaviors that they might see up the line, or what's happening is that they're able to have these bad behaviors, but they're not checked. Nothing's being done about them. So if you have organizations down the line, it's generally a leadership issue. 2016, I coached 7 CEOs, and one won the awesome 2017 Australia CEO of the Year. She was absolutely wrapped with that. She is a very dynamic, very innovative CEO, and she deserved the award. We've won really various 5 international national industry awards, major keynote speaker. I'm just telling you this, showing you this. It's really not that important. I suppose it's important for you to ask yourself, well, what experience do I have and why you should be listening to me? So these are some of the clients and the companies that count on us to work with them. And obviously we love what we do. We work across different organizational areas. 2000, after more than 20 years of working with clients and patients, I realized that actually my mission was to work in organizations. That's where the source of anxiety and mental health issues seem more than in the workplace and at home. People would talk to me about a boss who didn't listen, team members who were rude, workplace conflicts, and lack of direction that was just ongoing. So they'd come and see me for some sort of solution to the problem. And when I actually took a step back, I realized that most of the problems were at work, not really at home. So I launched into speaking at conferences and working with organizations, leaders, and teams, and absolutely love what I do. So now if we get into the sort of basics of what I'm here to tell you about today, really we talk about 5 key things that various organizations struggle with, and I want to tell you some of the things we've done to help them when we're talking about working with rude, grumpy, or difficult people. So problem number 1 is that team members are just plain nasty. Now, when I talk about team members, it could be team members in your team, it could be team members in another team, but people are just really plain nasty. Some are rude, ignore you or ignore others. I walked into an organization a couple of weeks ago where I saw these 2 people screaming at each other. Other people were just standing around watching. They've got a chart or a code of conduct, but those all went out the door and nobody did anything about it. They just screamed and shouted. Others, conversely, are passive-aggressive. So they're nice to your face, but they make your life hell because they talk about you, they talk, disparagingly about things you do or things you don't do, and they just make life absolutely hell. The silent treatment, probably one of my worst types. I'm actually going to address 6 bad bullies in my next webinar, so you'll get information about that. But the silent treatment is that they just ignore you. So they'll come to work. They may greet everybody else, but they ignore you, and there's a pointed ignoring of you. So if they walk into the cafeteria, for example, where you are, they walk out, or they'll walk in the morning with their handbag or their briefcase, and they'll sit in the desk next to you, and the silent treatment, it's like you don't exist. And it's very difficult to work with that, and very detrimental, really, to your emotional health, but also the health of others watching this, because it means that if they could do it to you and you stand up to them, well, they're probably going to be next. They undermine and devalue you any chance they can. And all of these behaviors that I'm showing in front of you are very, very detrimental and destructive to an organization, to team relationships, and also basically to business. So you get great staff walked out the door, too much aggression, too much fighting. Every person is sort of in it for themselves in these kind of teams. And often what you get is that you get these alliances and factions. So, grumpy people tend to stand together versus people who want to be more collaborative. And all of you who want to be more collaborative sort of look heavenwards to the leader to say, can you please help us? The real problem, though, ladies and gentlemen, is if the person who is the bully is the leader of the team. That's a whole nother discussion, which I'll mention a little bit later on. People are generally really unhappy. Many don't want to go to work. And very often what we then get is absenteeism, stress-related leave, workers' compensation. The boss does not deal with the problem. And these things just go round and round. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you take it from a pure commercial sense, the organization suffers. Problem 2, staff morale then obviously is low. Jane's Floral Stores, I just use these as kind of organization examples. They're obviously not the name of the organizations, but people in this particular organization, people in teams who are talking about each other, no common direction, not working together, staff satisfaction survey, which I had a look at. They had done it 3 months before, I think it was, and it was low, really low. Things like communication, collaboration, camaraderie, optimism, all low. When I'm talking about a ranking, let's say 5 being high, in this organization, no higher than 2. And generally what you've got is people who are struggling in their working environment. And when I actually went into it, they're rude, kind of grumpy people everywhere. One top department doesn't talk to another, one person ignores another. And the most important thing that I want to make, the point here, is that very often grumpy people in one department rely on grumpy people in another department, or, you know, lovely people in one department rely on people who are difficult in another department for information that they need to get the project done. And so what you've got is that you've got this organizational disconnect everywhere. So people are not getting the jobs done, frustration increases, anger increases, you lose good people, and miserable people are the result. And here's research, yet 67% of people at work are unhappy with their bosses or their colleagues. And interestingly, many are afraid to say something, so they just stay unhappy. And many get unwell, and it affects the health of not only the organization, but the people who are suffering with difficult and grumpy people, and not only them, but their families. You know, people, we know from so much of the engagement research is that people who are happy at work generally tend to be happy at home. But if you've got people who are unhappy at work because they spend so much of their time there, obviously they're going to be unhappy at home. Problem number 4, oh my gosh, silos and people not working together. Often what I find in organizations is you get grumpy people who actually form like a grumpy team. Now, they won't say it's a grumpy team because they think that they're in the right and they think that the others are in the wrong. But once you've got these kind of alliances, these kind of factions, they pitch themselves against others in the same team very often. And what you'll find, a classical example would be that the grumpy team will go and sit and have lunch together and criticize other people in the team or other people in the organization. So you've got these factions, you've got these alliances. And ultimately, the real issue here is that as long as rude, grumpy, or difficult behavior is accepted and allowed to continue, then ultimately it is condoned. And if it's condoned, you then have silo mentality. Means that this is what you're going to get in these organizations. Departments and teams pitched against each other. And therefore, often issues are ignored. You know, things go round and round and round. One department asks something from the next department, nothing happens. And so if I'm often asked to go in and coach a CEO or coach a board, I'll say, well, let me have a look at the executive team. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you is because very often if you've got issues down the line, as I said just now, it's because the people at the top of the organization are not collaborating together as a unified team. So what happens then is that down the line, these departments and areas of the organization don't talk to each other. However, and I think this is a really big however, is that people and leaders down the line can still do something about addressing these issues, even though the stem, the cause of the organization is further up the line, which I'll explain a little bit later on. And then business suffers. It has to suffer by definition. You know, clients are lost. How many times have I been into organizations where big clients are lost? And when I am asked to find out what the reason is, and I sort of ferret around and I scratch the surface, it's because of all of these things that I'm talking about. You know, lack of communication, grumpy people, silos, turf wars mentality, and it's because it's allowed. And then what happens is, for example, a really large hospitality organization we were called into about 2 or 3 weeks ago, silo mentality. So they lost their biggest client, and the reason why they lost the client is because there was vital information that one team had to obtain from another team to be able to service this particular client. But the other team, who we relied upon to give the information, just didn't give it. They were too busy. They weren't interested. They had other things going on. So ultimately, the team that really needed the information didn't get it. And the client lost the plot with this organization and said, well, that's fine. That's okay. You don't want us. We're obviously not important. So took their business elsewhere. 7 people had to leave the organization due to the loss of this client. So they had to retrench, etc. And why, ladies and gentlemen? For such simple reasons. All the reasons I've described. profitability suffered, the organizational reputation was affected, because, you know, this particular industry that I'm talking about is quite a small industry that they service. And ultimately, whilst we say, well, they lost this big client, but this industry is small enough for people to talk to each other. And therefore, often it's the reputation. And let me tell you something, that once organizational reputation is affected, very often it's exceptionally difficult to rebuild that organizational reputation. 8 months later, the issue was still not addressed. 2 more major clients were lost. So, and that you know, quite rightly, you're thinking, so where is the issue? The issue is leadership, absolutely at the top. But part of the issue was also allowing these kind of, as I said, turf wars, silo mentalities, and grumpy, rude, difficult people not assessing or understanding the fact that they're part of a bigger picture, which is to drive and to, you know, create a fantastically successful organizations. But no, they're too lost in their ability to feel that they're right or wrong, or senses of justice or injustice. And so everybody suffers. And it's a very frugal, many-minded approach to running businesses and teams. The CEO was then fired. Now, one might say, well, there you go, Karen, that's karma. And certainly it might have been. When I look back at this particular case study and I really think about the person who was the CEO, he should never have been the CEO. He just didn't have the skills. He didn't have the skills to run the organization from a technological perspective. He didn't understand the technical aspects of hospitality. But more importantly, and maybe I often argue that they don't need the technical skills, he didn't have the relationship skills. So it was a lose-lose situation all round. So the issue lies really in, as I said, executive leadership. It lies in the right rules down the organization, values, how we behave, but also people being called on their behavior, people being made aware that the behavior that they are exhibiting is actually just not okay. And that's one of the biggest issues I find in organizations. We know, for example, that Johnny's bad-mooded and he's unpredictable, but we all work around Johnny. You know, oh, Karen, that's just Johnny. You know, Johnny's just an unpredictable personality. That's not good enough, ladies and gentlemen. It's just not good enough. Because at the end of the day, your productivity and your efficiencies are often assessed according to how the team works. And if you've got unpredictable Johnny being Johnny, then everybody covers up for Johnny. What it means in a nutshell is that very often teams and organizations carry dead wood. And as long as you carry dead wood, you'll never be as effective as you could be. Problem number 5, rude people, no collaboration. So Flora's Floral Art Empire, I thought that was a great name for a company. 2 people came on shift. This was a true story. 2 people came on shift to work together, except they don't like each other. I mean, it's a bit like kindergarten, right? So they don't like each other. But they hadn't realized that they were both on the same shift. So obviously one of them hadn't checked the roster, or they hadn't both, or the roster had come out too late, etc., etc. And so what then happened, one actually walked out the door when they realized that the person they don't like was on shift, and went home. So because it was a very busy period for this organization, what then happened was that there was not enough staff to cover 3 large orders that had to be done that day, and they lost the client. They lost the client because you had behavioral problems between 2 people in an organization, both difficult, both rude, both grumpy, but more importantly, I think, both really immature and not seeing the bigger picture, that actually, let's pull in together, let's work together hard to make this the best shift we've got. Let's let our, you know, quiet issues aside for the moment, and let's work together to get this order out, or these orders out, and to make a fantastic shift for the day. No, we didn't do that. We focused on the fact that I don't like you because you're rude, and you don't like me because I'm grumpy. Very much kindergarten things. And what I often say when I speak at conferences is this. I often believe when I'm working in organizations that the adults with whom I work are really merely little people in big bodies, because the way they fight and, you know, non-collaborate with each other is just amazing. And of course it affected the profit. So would you like to see how to fix these issues? I guess this is really what we're talking about today. And it's not really that difficult, but it is around collaboration, it's about persistence, and it certainly is around dedication to it. So dealing with the nasty people. The catering company. Nasty people, I believe, are like a cancer in any organization. As long as they're left to grow, they will destroy people and the organization over time. And I think part of this problem is that, as I've just explained, is that team members or other team members let them, just ignore them or let them be, or you've got a boss, a manager who won't address the issue. And essentially that is ineffective leadership. If you then have a manager or a boss who is like this, who is negative and nasty and rude, it leaves you with a few choices. Obviously, you could go to HR, you could go to, your union, if you're a member of a union, if you have those. You could go the level above you. That's often always quite difficult because then you're jumping the organizational line or the operational line. But ultimately, the point that I'm making is if nothing is done, nothing will change. So what we did is we actually pulled the leadership team together because, as I said, I think that's where it often starts. We worked out a key strategy forward. We united them as a team and not as separate individuals, and we actually designed a charter with them. So they had their, code of conduct on the wall. But let me tell you something. Largely, code of conduct sitting on the wall in reception are a waste of time. And I would say 90% of the time when I say to people, so do you actually use your code of conduct? Well, we do have one. Karen, I was working with a large organization yesterday. Do you have your code of conduct? Yes, they say. So what is it? Oh, well, it's really long, Karen. Okay, how many pages? Oh, probably, I think it's about 13. 13 pages of a code of conduct, ladies and gentlemen, is a waste of time. You probably need 4 or 5 different things, and you get people to be measured and performance appraised against that code of conduct. So we actually unified the team, and what did we do then? We introduced a new way of doing things around here. We upskilled the leaders. That took us a while. But what was also interesting was we got a representation of staff involved to design a new culture. I always say, and it says it in the studies, the more you get staff involved in creating a new order, the better the chance you have of success. So we then worked on creating highly performing teams across various levels of the business. And we then did a survey, and ultimately productivity had increased 37% in 9 months, and they actually won a national industry award. The point I make with this story is that even though you might have low morale or a morale of fear and politics, you can actually change that around with, as I said, dedication and with persistence, but you've got to have the leadership behind you. If you don't, for example, have the executive leadership behind you, it becomes almost insurmountable at times. Even if you might have your direct manager who's on your side, you certainly can make change down the line, not significant change potentially because you're working in an environment of low support, but ultimately there are things that you can do. And I'll get in a little while to what you can do as an individual if you're working with difficult or grumpy people in your team. So the solution to problem 2 was the low morale, Gary's homewares. We spent time understanding the problem. Part of the problem in this particular organization was that there was no real job descriptions. They were very vague. There were no key performance indicators. So what had happened was that people were unsure who was doing what and where. And so there was a lot of sort of crossing over of somebody's job, or there was a lot of, when I walk into an organization and I hear the terms, that's not my job, I know that we're working within an organization with low morale. Because one of the things that determines a high performing team is everything is everybody's job, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, not technically to go and do somebody's job, but it's about the morale, it's about the behaviors, it's about greeting everybody, it's making work a great place to be, I always tell the tissue story I did last time. I'm sitting in reception waiting to go and coach a CEO, and there's a piece of tissue on the floor at reception. And if I can tell you something, 20 people walked past that piece of tissue, some even walked over it, including the receptionist, and nobody did a thing. So the CEO comes in, he calls me, I walk past, I pick up the piece of tissue. I say to the receptionist, why didn't anybody pick up the piece of tissue? She says, I don't know. I said to her, why didn't you pick up the piece of tissue? She says, it's not my job. I said, why isn't it your job? She says, it's a cleaner's job. So this was on a Tuesday. I said, oh, okay, when's the cleaner coming? She says, Friday. So 3 more days, ladies and gentlemen, that they would have left that tissue there waiting for the cleaner. That says to me low morale, low performance. So something to really think about. Low morale happens over time. You don't just have a company, then suddenly, you know, one day you're okay and the next day, you know, low morale. No, low morale happens over time where issues aren't addressed, leaders don't lead properly, communication struggles, we don't work on projects together, you know, we have grumpy, rude people. Ultimately, you're going to have low morale. So we identified key solutions, we got staff involved, we designed 5 key strategies to move this organization forward. And one of them was just collaboration, you know, creating a cross-functional team to sort issues out. We implemented a communication process across and down this organization. We worked the charter, the code of conduct, whatever you want to call it, and we made that something that was part of their performance appraisals. No good, as I said, having a charter on the wall at reception. It's just a waste of time. And we raise skills to exemplary levels. One of the things I always say wherever I am is that if you are in a leadership role, for example, I want you to get into the habit of demanding and expecting exemplary performance time after time. So as long as you're in a leadership position and you come to accept mediocre performance, you will get mediocre performance. As long as you accept that there's grumpy and rude people in your team with whom you deal and you sort of work around them, then you're going to continue to get rude and grumpy people. So raise your team to exemplary leadership and skills in everything that you want. So for example, you want exemplary tasks done on time and a top quality outcome, and relationships are exemplary relationships where we collaborate, we're harmonious, and we work things through. That's when you're going to get different organizations. Again, focus on tasks and relationships. So solutions to problem 3, miserable people. This is a technology company we were in. We spoke to the staff, all of them. We did a survey, we did focus groups, tell us what's going on, what do they think could work? You know, and obviously this was an organization where the people at the top were open to this. Now, I appreciate that there's actually a lot of you on the line today, heaps of you, over 35 of you. And there would be some of you on the line who would say, well, Karen, that's all well and good, but the problem really is the people at the top, the CEO. And it's very difficult to change the people at the top if you aren't at that level. And I always say, you know, there's a really interesting Chinese saying, and the first time I heard it, I was absolutely horrified because I think it just isn't particularly polite. But the saying is this, that the fish rots at the head. If the fish rots at the head, it means that the rest of the fish is going to rot, which really then comes back to all the conference speaking and the CEO coaching I'm doing, is that if we get organizations that are really thriving and doing well, generally it's because you've got the leader at the top who's doing the same thing and driving high performance down the line. And if you're not getting that, then you're going to get problems down the line. And if you've got the rude, grumpy and difficult person at the top, well, it's a really, really lonely and difficult place to be. But if you have the opportunity as an HR team or to speak to the HR team, and if there are enough people who find that the people at the top grumpy or difficult, then it's almost like to have this delegation of going to the people at the top. And I do appreciate it takes courage to say, look, we're really unhappy with what goes on in this organization. We're wondering if we could work out how to fix it moving forward. But one of the key things I will say at the end of this presentation is that if your top leadership group or person is unchangeable in inverted commas, or you believe that you will get nowhere, I always say that there's absolutely no point in staying in an organization where you've got people at the top who are rude and grumpy and difficult. Even if you try and change them or try and collaborate or try and, you know, get involved in a change process, I always say leave, because they will drive your emotional, physical and spiritual health through the floor. We acted on the solutions, we upskilled the leaders, we were given the opportunity to do this, we gave staff more autonomy, and the autonomy was also around calling behaviors, where we actually taught them how to call behaviors from others in the team and others in other teams. So we changed the culture really from power and control to achievement and support. And I might add, this took us 2 years, so this wasn't something that we did overnight. 21% of staff turnover in the 6 months. So in other words, what I'm saying is that when we initially got into this organization, the staff turnover was, are you ready for this, 57%. Now, when you've got an organization with a 57% staff turnover, you've got a problem, a big problem, because half of your people don't stay. Half of your people are rude. We found these people were rude. They were talking about each other. There was lack of trust. There was lack of communication. So we brought it down over 6 months to 21% from 57, which was a reduction in 26. But having said that, we still have a long way to go, because any organizational leader, including me, would tell you that 21% staff turnover is far too high. Staff satisfaction survey we did was, well, it's increased much, as you can say, over the last 6 months. So we were really happy with the outcome. But really, when you're talking about dealing with rude and grumpy people, if it's not just one staff member in your team, which is unlikely, then, you know, if it's organization-wide, then there's a lot of strategies that have to be applied to address the issue, because it's a cultural leadership issue. But if it's one person in the team, then I think I'll get into that a little bit later on about standing up to that person, because very often, as I've said on a couple of occasions this morning, we just tolerate that behavior. And if you tolerate the behavior, you're going to get more of it. So solutions to problem 4, which is silos. Joe's Shoes is a company I'm just calling it. Silos are an outcome. Silos are not the problem. So the cause of the problem is what we had to understand. It was on this occasion a leadership issue, not at the top, actually, sort of middle management. We identified on this occasion that there were issues between 2 leaders at middle management. So we had a discussion with them, and we designed a process to increase communication and cooperation on all levels of the organization. We also worked with the chart of behavior, and we implemented that. And for the first time ever in this organization, we created cross-functional discussions and projects. And we then did a staff satisfaction survey, which was up 65% since last time, you know, a year ago. So very often, again, you know, it might not be executive leadership where you have these staff issues. It might be down the line, but it is about doing something about trying to address those silo mentality problems. And both of the leaders, which was really interesting, were as grumpy and as rude as each other, not only to each other, I might add, but to their people down the line. And therefore, people often say, well, where does the problem lie? The problem actually lies in the leadership level, if you like, above those leaders, because they had learned and they had known for a long time that those particular people were grumpy and moody, but did nothing. So, you know, it actually took on this occasion the people down the line to do something and make enough noise to get people in like us or other people, but on this occasion obviously it was us, to do something about it. And the leaders above them were open to doing something about it. But if you've got silos, you've got a problem, because you cannot have an organization where each department works in silos, as you all know, because HR depends on technology, who depends on finance, who depends on operations. We all, you know, we like siblings in a family. And if the siblings in the family are grumpy and not talking to each other, you're going to have a very unhappy family. So problem number 5, rude people prevent collaboration. So Harriet's Health Store Chains, we came to understand the cause of the problem. Ultimately, we spoke to the people, we designed a transformational team, we involved staff. I'm very, very big on involving staff in everything that we come up with, because the staff are the people who are going to execute the, you know, the plan. And so I always say, don't design a plan without including the people who are actually going to execute your plan. Oh, well, it's a, you know, I think we need to do it, Karen, because our people will follow the rules. Why would your people follow the rules? Why don't you get them involved in making the rules? Because then you know, you give them increased sense of empowerment. You make them feel as if their voices are heard. You increase motivation, all the stuff that you know. We implemented the plan, completely different organization, and you can see what the recent outcomes were. So lots of things that you can do regarding dealing with difficult, rude people. This is a really, really great guy. We had the most amazing opportunity to work on an island owned by Red Bull. And this particular CEO had a problem. He had some rude and difficult people, and all the things that I'm talking to you about, we actually did on this island, which was just wonderful. We did a lot of engagement with the staff. We did lots of games with them. We did lots of strategies. And we really, really, I think, made an impact, which was around the fact that they had been in a situation, there were silos for a long time, there was lots of grumpy, difficult people. And I think the other thing I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, is that, to resolve this issue is not that difficult. It really is not that difficult. It just takes a team of dedicated people supported by people at the top. So 6 things to do with grumpy, rude people. This is what I promised. Number 1 is do not tolerate the behavior. I see too much tolerating of too much bad, grumpy behavior. And even if it is your boss, and I appreciate that if it is your boss, often we're too scared to say anything because we're fearful of our jobs, we're fearful of the repercussions, we're fearful of so many things that could go wrong. And I do get that. I've been in this situation many, many years ago where I worked for the most horrible individual. He was awful. In fact, I remember taking my problem up to HR, who did nothing. Eventually, I took it to another member of the executive committee, which actually was a really interesting thing. I don't think I did myself any favors in the first instance because I think they felt that I had sort of spoken above the operational line, which I had. But eventually I left because I couldn't stand what I was seeing, and he was so rude and awful. But about 3 months after I left, interestingly, he was fired. And a month after that, this organization rang me back to come and take his job. And I said no, because I figured I didn't get the support then, and I just didn't feel it was the right thing to do. But with grumpy people, figure out what you will say before you say it. So if you've got Johnny who's really rude, instead of getting angry and just saying, you're always rude all the time and we're sick of your behavior, which is an aggressive approach, you will never really win aggression on aggression. Remain calm, write down the things you want to say to this person, and I guess then ask them for a meeting, and always remain calm. That's really key. I always say she or he remains calm's win. But if you do nothing, nothing's going to change. So speak out respectfully, make your statement. Once you've made your statement, don't defend it, just wait. But I guess the most important thing when you're dealing with a person like this is to tell them how their behavior is impacting you and the team. And that could include the manager or the leader who you work for. And I do say, I get the fact that it could be quite scary. So maybe if you're wanting to speak to a leader and all of you are experiencing it, then you go collectively as a team, but you don't go in a way that makes them feel as if you're ganging up. It's more around the positives around, we love working here, we enjoy, being part of this organization. The areas for improvement are, when you speak to us like this, it's really upsetting, or when you ignore us in the morning, it really impacts us as a team, or when you don't give us information we need, and then when we ask you, you're cranky at us, it really affects the morale of how we work together. Then come up with solutions of what we would like is this in the future. So you stand up either individually or you stand up collectively. But the real thing is not to argue, because if you argue, then you've lost ground. So remain calm and stand your ground. And again, if it's not your leader, then you involve your leader or HR if you need to. I always say, as far as possible in organizations, let's say you've got a rude and grumpy team member, so they're on the same peer level as you are, try and resolve the issue before you go to your manager. And the reason why I say that is I think it often indicates teams who are mature and teams who are confident enough or capable enough to go and address the issue before they involve their leader. I think that when you need to get the leader involved, it's only kind of as a last resort. Obviously, if your leader is the problem, then you've got other areas that you need to think about, which is what I said just now. You go to HR, you might have to speak to your unions, you might have to go to the person above, the manager of your leader, and I appreciate that's difficult. But if you do nothing, I think this is a key thing for all of you to think about. If you do nothing, then nothing will change. And as long as you accept that nothing will change, even though it's affecting your emotional, your physical, and your mental health, then that's okay. But ultimately, I think the leaders of the organization need to realize that if they've got lots of people down their lines who are unhappy and who have rude and grumpy people that are making the lives of others miserable, and most importantly, or equally importantly, affecting the bottom line, then that's what you're going to get. If nothing changes, that's what you're going to get. So build a case individually or as a team. And again, I'm going to swing back to something I said earlier. If nothing changes and it's really affecting your life, I'm going to say, and I always say this, there is no job on this planet There is no money that you can earn. There's no love of working with some great people that can actually make you stay in an organization that's making you sick. Because if you are sick because of rude and grumpy people, let me tell you something, your health is at risk. And nobody, no job, no organization is worth that. This is this was the CEO I was telling you about at the beginning of the presentation that I coached, and she was the one who won the Australian CEO of the Year. She has to be the most charismatic, wonderful CEO. I wish every CEO I worked with or trained could be like her. She was just so engaging of her people. She realized that there were issues that needed to be, addressed, and she went out there to solve them. And I was standing with her side by side the whole way. And her organization, she would tell you, is a completely different organization to the organization it was, a year or 2 years ago. And that's what I really love, when I'm able to see organizations or teams like hers, and maybe even like yours, because otherwise you wouldn't be on this webinar, change so that things start to thrive and things just work. So I guess the question is, if there's so many of you on the line today, it was really quite amazing to see how many, but are you ready to take the next step? I mean, do you want to see how different, your organization, how things can be for you as an individual? Do you want to see how different it can be for your team, for your organization? I said to you at the very beginning that I was prepared to give a free 1-hour strategic review to you, 5 of you. I don't have the opportunity to do too many more. But all you have to do is go onto a Time Trade link, and I'm happy to talk your issues through with you. What will happen after this webinar, if you're comfortable with this, is that MJ, who I was talking to a little bit earlier on, and she is my marketing guru, will send you an invitation and the opportunity to have a review with me. I would love to talk to you about these issues if you feel it will help you. And I guess the more important thing is that you've come onto this webinar for a reason. And the more important thing is that, the question is, can I afford to take the time out to have a strategic review? I guess the more important question is, can you afford not to? Because at the end of the day, you've got issues going on in your organization or your team that are concerning or upsetting you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So we do various things. We run programs to help you learn how to deal with rude people. We do lots and lots of coaching, team development, leadership development, obviously. And there's a free ebook, which I'm encouraging you to go and download. It's either on leadership or it's on relationships at work, so feel free. There's no cost involved. Go to www.puremagicbusiness.com.au, grab yourself a free ebook and just read it. I mean, the ebooks, and there's many of them I've written, have really come from 25 years of experience of working in organizations and dealing with these issues. So it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Absolutely good timing, really, 9 minutes to 11. And I'm just wanting to know if there are any questions that you may have. Is there anything here that you would like to ask me about, or would you like to share something with us that maybe we could help you with, or I could help you with? Anything at all? Now's the time, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I have a question here from Sam. Sam's asking me the question about narcissism at work. So what is a narcissist? A narcissist is a person who really believes that the world just revolves around them. In other words, the sun rises to suit them, the sun sets to suit them. And in organizations, those are people who are always, it's about me. So what I want, what I need you to give me, my things. I need you to do everything you can to make my job easier, to make my life happier. And a lot of the issues, which is really interesting, I call them the organizational psychopaths, which is probably a bit cheeky, but I do call them, is often you get, people coming into organizations and psychopathically, all they do is they want to get to where they want to go to. And really, they don't care if they walk all over people or whether they, upset people along the line. And I think they have narcissistic tendencies. So it doesn't matter about you or about, you know, us as a team, as long as I'm actually the person who's being looked after. And again, the same issues remain that we've talked today. You need to stand up to a narcissist, because if you don't stand up to a narcissist, what they do is they just run free rein, and their narcissism becomes even more apparent, and they start walking over more and more people. The real struggle, I think, in organizations is when you've got the narcissist who runs the organization. And I must tell you, ladies and gentlemen, there are those, and who don't believe that they are the narcissist. You know, they feel that they're doing an absolutely fantastic job of running the organization, and don't see that their behavior is unpredictable or their behavior is demanding and demeaning. And it's a very difficult situation. But again, I probably wouldn't change anything that I've spoken to you today about on the webinar, but I would probably go and have a bit of research around narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, and what potentially you can do with them if they do work in your team, or if they are your boss or further up the line. They're not easy to work with. Okay, there's another question here from Charlotte, who's asking me about the charter. So the charter, another word is code of conduct or behavioral guidelines. The charter is important because it sets out the behaviors that we have as a team. And when you've got people who go against the behavioral guideline, the charter, ultimately then you've got people who are just ignoring the rules that we've made, that we will actually stick together and how we will call each other on our behaviors. That's really important. So the charter, I believe, in the success that we've had over the years, is that we get teams to design their own, and a contribution from each team member, and then we basically make sure everybody has a copy of that charter, and ultimately that charter becomes what we behave according to as a team. And we use the charter in each team meeting. We use the charter in performance appraisals at the end of the year. And we basically use that behavioral charter to guide behavior. So if Johnny comes in really bad mooded, you actually say to him, excuse me, but you know what we have is we have a charter that we've all agreed to, and your behavior is not actually according to the charter, so we ask you to change it. And so you can actually, you know, use it really well to determine and behaviors, and also to pull bad behaviors into line. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. A lot of you on the line. Please feel free to contact us. I hope to meet some of you on a strategic review. Please go onto our websites. We're happy to come into your organization and chat to you free of charge at any time. You know where we are. So it's been my pleasure and my absolute privilege speaking with you today, and have a fantastic Thursday, what's left of it. Take care and God bless.